Hello, this is John Griffin again with part 4 in a series of short videos on the subject of a universal basic income. In this video, I will discuss what a UBI will cost and how we will pay for it. In previous videos, I claimed that all citizens are owners of an equal share of our societal infrastructure. That infrastructure consists of society's accumulated knowledge and technology, and our physical, educational, legal, and military infrastructure. Any business or individual using that infrastructure in the production of goods and services receives considerable value from that use. In the past, enterprises have paid for that use by creating jobs that offered a living wage and that gave workers a path to a middle-class standard of living. In today's increasingly automated world, however, those enterprises are no longer creating enough of those jobs. Therefore, another method of payment is required. That new payment method can be in the form of a user fee that is simply paid in cash. That cash would then fund a universal basic income. Since society is supplying the infrastructure, the fee for its use would appear on a company's financial statement as just another payment to a supplier. Therefore, that fee would not depend on profits and instead would be based on the value added at each step of production. In the determination of this fee, it is only fair to recognize that certain companies pay a higher percentage of their revenue toward labor costs than others. Those companies should be granted a reduction in their usage fee in recognition of the proportion of revenue that already goes toward worker compensation. The exact formula used to determine each company's fee is best left to the professional economists. This brings us to the two most common questions asked about a UBI. How much would an individual be paid per month, and what would be the total yearly cost to the country? In a previous video, I showed that a monthly payment of $1,065 would put an individual above the official U.S. poverty level and would officially end poverty in the U.S. immediately. Since this is an excellent goal, I will use that as our target payment. Now, how many people would we have to pay, and what would be the total yearly cost? At the end of 2019, the U.S. population was a little over 329 million. According to Wikipedia, in their article titled Demographics of the United States, approximately 7.7% are non-citizens and therefore not eligible for a UBI under our definitions. That leaves approximately 303.85 million, of whom approximately 76%, or 230.9 million, are adult citizens over the age of 18. If we are only going to make payments to adults, then a quick calculation would give us our answer. The UBI would cost approximately $2.95 trillion per year. However, we can anticipate a strong desire to help families with dependent children. A fixed payment per child would encounter objections on the grounds that we should not encourage people to have children just to increase their income. A workable compromise could be to offer 8/10 of an adult UBI payment for the first child, 6/10 for the second, 4/10 for the third, and nothing beyond the third child. Some families will have fewer than 3 children, and some will have more. So let's assume that an overall average would work out to about 5/10 of an adult UBI payment for all citizens under the age of 18. That would add approximately another $470 billion to our yearly expense for a total of approximately $3.4 trillion. No one will dispute that $3.42 trillion is a lot of money. But the core question is, can we as a country afford to pay that? The answer is yes, we can absolutely afford that. Of course, a payment of that size would not be possible in a poor country, but the United States is far from poor. According to Federal Reserve economic data, our annualized GDP at the end of 2019 was $21.729 trillion, so our UBI would require less than 16% of our GDP. This level of expenditure will still leave well over 80% of our GDP for other purposes, including providing the incentive for capitalists to do what they do so well. After all, we don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So just where will the money come from? One source that addresses that question is Andy Stern's excellent book on UBI titled Raising the Floor, published in 2016. I cite that book on my website, and on page 212, he offers a menu of funding possibilities. The first item in his menu is, and I quote, "Cash out all or some number of the 126 welfare programs that currently cost $1 trillion a year," end quote. A UBI would not only replace those programs, it would also eliminate the expensive bureaucracy needed to administer them. That fact alone should please those who advocate for smaller government. The second menu item is, quote, "Raise revenue by eliminating all or some of the federal government's $1.2 trillion in tax expenditures," end quote. A tax expenditure occurs when the government foregoes revenue by granting tax deductions for various purposes. Such deductions disproportionately benefit high earners and were often justified by claiming that everyone would benefit when those high earners used that money to create jobs and generate additional tax revenue. This is the old and tired trickle-down theory that over 30 years of increasing income inequality has shown to be a myth. So, with just these two items, we have reduced the amount of new revenue needed for our UBI to a little over $1.2 trillion, approximately 5.6% of our GDP. For those who may still doubt that we have enough revenue sources to cover that remaining $1.2 trillion, I offer the following data published by the Economic Policy Institute in December of 2019 in a report titled "Top 1% of Earners See Wages Up 157.8% Since 1979. That report states that in 1979, the top 10% of wage earners claimed 30.2% of all wages, and by 2018, they claimed 39%, an increase of 8.8 percentage points. I'm going to make the not unreasonable assumption that the top 10% of wage earners also claimed at least as large a share of total GDP. How are they able to claim an additional 8.8% of our GDP in those 39 years? The obvious answer is that computerization and automation allowed them to pay less in wages to their employees and keep the difference for themselves. That 8.8% of GDP in 2018 comes to $1.84 trillion. One can easily claim that that additional $1.84 trillion was made possible by improvements in our societal infrastructure, and therefore should go toward the UBI. At this point, we have located more than enough eligible funds to cover our $3.42 trillion yearly universal basic income. In previous videos, I presented clear evidence that over the last 40+ years, businesses have not been creating the same number of worthwhile jobs that had previously been their form of payment for their use of our society's infrastructure. One can easily argue then that a considerable amount of back payments is due. One way to recover those back payments is to institute, at least for a limited time, a wealth tax and use it to help fund the UBI. At this point, we have found that it is easy to locate and to justify the use of more than enough funds to cover our suggested UBI payments. The logical next question should be, just how far should we go in pursuing such funds? To answer that question, we must recognize a fundamental truth of capitalist economies. That truth is that a relatively small percentage of our population drives and manages our economy. These hardworking people own and operate the businesses that produce our goods and services. The rest of us are their employees or are simply on the sidelines as consumers. It is possible to take so much from these business owners that they will just throw up their hands and say it is no longer worth their effort. If that happens, then we have indeed killed the goose that lays the golden egg. I believe it is possible, however, to establish a level of payment for the use of society's infrastructure that will both support our UBI and still leave enough to motivate the large majority of business owners. I base that belief on historical precedent. In the 1950s and 60s, the average company CEO was paid 20 to 25 times what the average worker earned. Today's CEO is paid 200 or more times that average. In the 50s and 60s, we did not see CEOs sitting on the sidelines with their arms folded, saying that they would not enter the game until their pay was increased by another factor of 10. They were all in the game, and they were fully engaged. If future capitalists find their pay multiple reduced by a reasonable amount, I don't believe that a significant number of them will leave the game. Once we have decided on what is a reasonable percentage of our GDP, or perhaps per capita GDP, to devote to the UBI, then we can simply index future payments to changes in that number. This brings us to the end of this video on the cost and funding of the universal basic income. The next video, the fifth and last in this series, will deal with how we will spend our time in a world that offers ever fewer conventional jobs. Once again, I direct your attention to the companion website for these videos. The address of that website is pinned directly below. And once again, I thank you for watching.